now. And I want to acknowledge that we are occupying the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalyapua, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. And we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. Welcome to the History and Evolution of Highways in Oregon. Your moderator today will be Margi Bradway, and your presenters are John Mermin, Glen Bolen, Karla Kingsley, and Shelli Romero. Thanks for joining us today. You can type your questions in the chat or use the raise hand tool, both which are found at the bottom of your screen. Throughout this session and throughout the summit, you can use the hashtag OATS21 to post about it on social media. And don't forget to visit our website at thestreettrust.org to learn more about our programs and activities, including SB 395, also known as Safe Routes for All, which is an update to the historic bike bill that we're championing in the Oregon legislature this session on the 50th anniversary of that historic legislation. And finally, to claim AICP credit for attending the session, please log into the OATS SCED platform and find the AICP certificate download link near the top of the page. So without further delay, welcome to your screen, Margi Bradway.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see old friends and new and some who I've never met. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue. And I guess we're almost getting into lunch. So thank you for staying with us through our lunchtime. My name is Margi Bradway. I am the Deputy Director of Metro, the regional government in Portland, Oregon region. And in that function, I oversee most of the MPO, or Transportation Planning and Resources work at Metro. I am going to kind of introduce the topic from the perspective of kind of the history of highways in Oregon, because I think it sets a context for the topic today, which will be covering what is called jurisdictional transfer, the potential transfer of one roadway from an owner to the other. You also hear this topic referred to as orphan highways, highways that maybe there's not as much ownership. And that has to do with the history of Oregon. So before John or Glen or Karla and Shelli speak, I'll give you a little bit of background. Some of you who know me may know that I spent years working for the state at ODOT. I've also worked at the city level, so I tend to bring both a state and local perspective to issues. And when I was working for the state, I learned about, the formation of roads and highways in Oregon, and it goes all the way back to Oregon statehood. So in 1860 is when the first road was made, right along the time of Oregon statehood. Now, of course, the tribes were here before us, and I want to recognize that, but in Oregon history books, that's where they talk about county roads being built. It wasn't until 1913 that the state legislature created the Oregon Highway Commission, which is now the Oregon Transportation Commission, but it was 1913. And right around that time, they had the idea of state highways, and state highways needed to connect urban areas or forming urban areas with farm, the need to bring timber to the ports. And so from 1914 to approximately 1944, there was a lot of state work done, and the first gas tax in the nation was passed by Oregon legislature to build those roads. In the Portland region, many of those roads that were being built were roads such as 82nd, TV Highway, Columbia. Those were the state highway system in the early 1900s. 122nd was a state, Sandy was a state highway, not 122nd, excuse me. So that was the state highway system until approximately 1944. There was a post-war effort led by Eisenhower, and there was a lot of National Laws Act passed the most important was the Interstate Act of 1944 that took a bunch of federal money, created the Federal Highway Administration, and said, now we're going to create a federal network of highways, which is commonly known as the interstate system. And when the federal government was coming in, they did have agreements with the state of Oregon coming in to try to create the federal highway system. They had two choices at that time. They could either build off of the existing state system. This is kind of nationwide, build off the existing state system and get an agreement with the state to convert that to a federal interstate system, or they could build a new road. Where it was possible, they often, in many cases, made the state system a federal highway. So, I-5 was created for most of the state. That was a state highway, and it became a federal highway. But when they got to places like Portland, it was difficult, and there's really interesting history on this, for them to create a new, or go over the existing state highway to get the big highway that they wanted. So in places like Portland, and this happened in other urban regions, they put the federal highway parallel or close to the state highway. And that's why we have parallel routes. That's why 82nd parallels I-84, and I think John and Glen are going to get into this, or why Highway 26 parallels TV Highway. And at that time, there was never really a discussion about what to do with those parallel, what I call parallel routes that are now one federal and one state, which has led us to our topic today, to talk about what should happen, what does happen, what are the issues on these formerly used state highways that are now functioning more like local roadways. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the next panelist, John Mermin from Metro, to kick off the discussion.
Thank you so much, Margi. I'm John Mermin, Regional Transportation Planner with Metro. Let me share my screen, bring up the presentation real quick. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the regional framework for highway jurisdictional transfer project that Metro recently completed with the help of WSP as our consulting firm, and in close collaboration with ODOT. Glen Bolen, who will be speaking later, was the lead from ODOT. And the issue of jurisdictional transfer comes right out of that history that Margi just described. When some of these arterial type highways were first built, like 82nd Avenue on the left, it was the major route for connecting the whole state to the new airport. And there wasn't much development along it. It was served the long distance travel. But fast forward to today, when the interstates have replaced that longer distance function, and it's functioning much different way, much more biking, walking, and transit demand along it, much less longer distance travel. So the function has really changed. So the idea of transferring the ownership has come to be a long-term solution to help address this change. So in our most recent regional transportation plan, this idea came up because local jurisdictions identified that there's some unmet needs along these roadways. There's safety issues, equity issues that are feeling really urgent. And these roadways are no longer serving state travel, but there wasn't a clear process for how to work with ODOT and just how the discussions for how to meet these needs. So jurisdictional transfer provided this long-term solution for helping with this situation. So we kicked off the project, and this is the this is the universe of roadways, these arterial highways that are existing all over our region, north, south, east, and west. You can see like TV Highway to the west, 82nd Avenue in the east, Highway 43 in the south. You can see they're all over the place. And so it's a very relevant issue for the entire region. So with this project, what we did was really try to create a framework for how to create action on this issue going forward, really address the related issues to transferring a roadway, such as how the roadway is classified in the Oregon Highway Plan, how to do cost estimating when you're trying to fund a transfer, and what are the actual legal mechanisms for transfer. We didn't try to commit any funding or commit any jurisdiction to any specific transfer roadway, but really help set the framework going forward so we can kind of move these along in the future. So the study, which is available on our website at oregonmetro.gov/jurisdictional transfer, contains a lot of elements. There's a nice executive summary that really runs through the highlights. I'm going to share a few images coming up just from some of the inventory and atlas work to give you a sense of what you can find in it. But just to run through this quickly, we did a policy framework which described best practices for transferring roadways from past history in Oregon, and Glen's going to provide a few examples of that during his presentation in just a minute. An inventory and atlas with like images and existing conditions information for all these corridors, an evaluation of each corridor based on technical evaluation and a readiness evaluation, so kind of combining those two factors. How to do cost estimates, as I mentioned before, recommendations for changing roadway classifications, what are the equity considerations when doing jurisdictional transfer, and then lastly, a needs assessment on the corridors that seem the most ready, that were in the top tier. So this is an example from TV Highway. This is from our inventory and atlas. You can see a map of the corridor, what the environmental conditions are along it in terms of wetlands, wildlife, and riparian areas, a few images from the different points along the corridor. We provide information relating to existing conditions for the biking, walking, and transit system. What is the speed limit? What is the crash history for both pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles? And what is the population and employment numbers along the corridor? And then this one is showing demographic information. So all these little maps show a different demographic. So the first one is showing areas along this roadway that have higher than regional average percentage people of color. And then we have low income in the next one, no vehicle households, folks with disabilities, and then unemployed. So this gives you a sense of all the different information we've compiled to help evaluate these corridors and really provide the impetus for future transfer discussions going forward. With that, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague Glen Bolen at ODOT to talk a little bit about a couple of past transfers that have happened in the state of Oregon.
Thank you, John. Just get my screen up. Yeah, my name is Glen Bolen. I am a planner with Region 1 ODOT. My pronouns are he, him, and okay, can't see the screen anymore. So walk you through a little bit of just some of the things out in the past. This is not a new concept, this idea of transferring roadways. This map here is a modified version of the map John just showed, where the yellow lines here are roads that have previously been transferred from ODOT to cities or counties. There are, you see in the report, we used a series of case studies to look at, past transfers and figure out, what were the motivating factors, what were the elements required. And you see there were three main categories here. There was, incentive or mutual benefit. And these are places where, the community was looking for a different type of roadway. And ODOT transferring a roadway is a big cost savings in the long run because of maintenance. And some I know that, with gas tax revenues on the decline, maintenance is becoming a bigger and bigger issue all the time. And so this is a way for cities kind of get something they want and ODOT to save money in the future as a change occurs. Others are design and operations. I'm simply trying to create a new, I think Shelli's going to show a great example later of Outer Powell, how we want to transform a highway into an urban multimodal roadway. So often to prioritize non-auto use, although there are cases where cities want to take over a road because their design is cheaper to build, and they would like to see something happen. And then this is to do with land use. This is changing environment. I think John showed you a great example of 82nd Avenue and the land use pattern there, as it was when we just had to get to the airport, and it is now when we have lots of people living and working in the area. So I'm just going to walk through just a few examples here. One of them on the incentives and benefits side is Martin Luther King Jr. So I've got a kind of before-after picture here. So unfortunately, the air photos in 1994 weren't that great, but we had a 5-lane curb-tight arterial. The city wanted to do something different with their design, and you can see now they have on-street parking, they have pedestrian crossings, medians, a significant change from what would have been doable in the highway design manual. And part of the incentive side of this, ODOT did reconstruction of the viaduct further south, gave up some leases and property for use by the city and development opportunities. There's just one example. Another one, this is on the design and operations side. So this Forest Grove, 1999, to get through Forest Grove on Highway 47, you went really through Forest Grove, and the city was looking for a different, a highway level of service for a highway, which, as you can imagine, is difficult to do in downtown. So what happened instead, and you see here, the road network now, Highway 47 goes around. It's a bypass going around Forest Grove as an expressway, and then the old highway was then ceded to the city of Forest Grove. And you can see that, you can imagine what downtown Forest Grove really wasn't the optimal location for significant through traffic that happened as we grew. Another example here is Sandy Boulevard. And this is one where this was not on the incentives and benefits side, and there wasn't any big change of funds. But in this case, the city just wanted to do more multimodal design, things like markings and streetscape and crossings and furnishings, things to help support the redevelopment of the Hollywood area and beyond. So this, unfortunately, I got a Google Earth rainy picture day, but you can see we got now bike lanes, the green suggested crossings and facilities and redevelopment that's been happening. And another big example here, and this is another one about looking at changing land use. The city, Portland, trying to implement their comprehensive plan with centers and corridors, looked at wanting with trying to Metro Everyone planning the Interstate Avenue light rail, and the light rail couldn't happen on the state highway, so this one was given to the city of Portland. I'm sorry, this transfer had no funds. There were some funds involved with Sandy Boulevard. Funds from ODOT for state of good repair type of work. And then, so in this case, the light rail went in then following the transfer using FTA money and local regional match. And I think you can all know what's been happening on Interstate Avenue. So this is just a quick snapshot of a few examples. We are in conversations with our partners for several others. City of Portland adopted the 82nd Avenue plan. I think Karla's going to talk about that. Shelli's going to talk about Outer Powell that we're working on. We are hoping to work a transfer for Barber Boulevard with the bond measure that did not make it, so put that on hold for now. We're engaged actively with the city of Tigard for Hall Boulevard. Got a residential corridor there north of their own town. They'd like to make some changes. And then a small piece of Farmington Road out in Washington County. So that's just kind of what's on the radar, but this report hopefully presents the options for other opportunities throughout the region. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it. I think, Karla, are you next?
I think it's Shelli next.
Shelli.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Okay. You see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. 1 second here. Sorry, having a little bit of technical challenges here in sharing my screen. There it is. Okay.
I just made you co-host, Shelli, so let's see if that helps with your screen sharing.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should have it now. There you go.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Hi there, I'm Shelli Romero. I am Area Manager Central for ODOT Region 1. Most of my projects are within the Central City. So this is a quick presentation on the ODOT and PBOT moving towards a jurisdictional transfer, focusing on Outer Powell. Outer Powell is all of Powell, but Outer Powell specifically is a high crash corridor and had a lot of need of safety improvements and also just basic infrastructure, bike lanes, crossings, sidewalks, and the basis of the project was to make Southeast Outer Powell safer for all people using all modes. We had a robust community and agency involvement and collaboration, and worked with the community and with PBOT and other partners to identify community preferred solutions. So from there, we worked with the city and through different planning processes, got the corridor ready for funding to implement. And so today, the Outer Powell Boulevard Transportation Safety Project was funded in House Bill 2017. It provided the funds needed to transfer and upgrade Powell Boulevard. So ODOT will design and construct, and then when the design and construction is complete, we will transfer it to the city of Portland. The project limits go between I-205 and the East City limits, which is right at about Southeast 174th, where it changes jurisdiction from ODOT to the city of Gresham. And since it will be transferring, it will be Portland to the city of Gresham. So that is how that transfer is being initiated. The languages are actually written into the House bill. This is a look at the corridor. Over here on the left is the I-205, and then further to your right is the East City limits, or 174th. That phase 1, 122nd to 136th is complete. So if you have a second, go out and check it out. It's already got the sidewalks, the crossings, the bike lanes, the illumination improvements. And if you can envision that section, that 14 blocks is what the rest of this corridor is going to look like when complete. You'll get a preview of what's to come in the future. So the parts that are in design now with the House bill funds are from I-205 to 122nd and from 136 to 174th. And it continues to be work and design with construction anticipated somewhere in the 2023, 22, 22, 26. It's got water line and all kinds of complexities. So this is a picture of the before and after of the phase 1, which is the Southeast 122nd to 136th. You see the before on the left and you see the after on the right. And that is separated with tough curb bike lanes that you see there. Challenges along the way, as I mentioned, it's a complex corridor. We found there's a lot of right-of-way issues, so undefined driveways that need to be defined, acquisition of a small amount of right-of-way for our project, but encroachments, meaning that people have been parking on the side of Powell for years, which is technically ODOT right-of-way, but we've never really enforced that. So access management, as I mentioned, the open frontages and driveways, and then coordination with the Water Bureau, Portland Parks, TriMet, PBOT, and then there's a whole mess of utilities out here, not just the water line, but PGE, Northwest Natural, Communications, which if that doesn't go on schedule or go as planned, it can cause a lot of risk to the project. So our key takeaways are that we worked together with our partners at PBOT and others in the community to identify long-term vision and the steps to achieve the vision. That the premise that everybody in our city deserves basic infrastructure. This is a transit-dependent route. It also has a high number of, besides English, the highest number of folks in the area are speaking Chinese, Vietnamese, Russian, and Spanish. And finally, getting support from the state legislature to provide funding and to initiate a jurisdictional transfer. And that's what I've got. So with that, I'm going to go back and get out of here and turn it over to you, Karla.
Thanks, Shelli. I will share my screen.
Thank you.
Great. Are folks seeing my screen, just to confirm? All right, see a thumbs up. I will put it in presenter mode. All right, so I am Karla Kingsley. I'm a senior planner at the Portland Bureau of Transportation. And today I'll talk a little bit about 82nd Ave specifically. I'll note that Kristen Stallman is kind of my counterpart on 82nd Avenue. She was going to be here, but with the shift in dates, she had a conflict. But thanks a lot to her for helping prepare and for doing all this work. So before I go into my slides, I really just wanted to offer a moment for us to mourn the loss of the recent lives on 82nd that happened this month. Stephen Lucer and Anthony Tolliver, both who were killed while crossing 82nd Avenue. We cannot bring them back, nor can we bring back any of the other people who've lost their lives on 82nd Avenue. This is clearly an urgent need, and transforming the street just can't happen fast enough. So with them in mind, we'll continue working. And I just wanted to share with my presentation today, then some of the work that we have been doing, working towards jurisdictional transfer. And really keeping in mind that jurisdictional transfer is just one part of transforming the street, regardless of who owns it, ODOT or PBOT or both, which is actually the case today. We really need resources to invest in the street. And as we work to address the near-term safety needs, we also need to evolve our long-term vision on 82nd to really match more how it's functioning today and how we expect it to function and how we want it to function in the future. So the path towards jurisdictional transfer, I'm covering kind of the past 2 years of work. We've been working on this in a very focused way for the past two years, looking at these questions, really understanding what are the existing conditions on the street today, what's needed in terms of maintenance and safety, what do we already have funded, programmed, and then what's in the plans for the future. As I believe Glen mentioned, there's been some planning efforts. April Bertelson at PBOT led the most recent effort of the 82nd Avenue plan, and it identified a lot of the kind of near-term safety needs on the corridor, including a number of crossings, lighting, and a number of different kind of safety countermeasures, both at intersections and signalized intersections and unsignalized intersections that we need to do to improve the safety. But really with this presentation, I want to focus on that kind of maintenance aspect, and I'll just kind of give us an insight in terms of one area. And in doing so, first I want to look back and realize this is actually the same photo John Mermin showed. This is 82nd Avenue in the 30s. As he noted, the land uses are very different than they are today. But this was kind of when there was first a large investment in the street. And as you can see here, they're constructing a concrete base, which is very strong. It is still there today. And it goes down the middle of 82nd, all the way, I believe, up past Sandy. It doesn't go all the way to Killingsworth. Also during this time, there were some different transfers of ownership. So the north of Prescott at this point, it's what's called fee simple. And so that's where the state owns the public right-of-way and the infrastructure on it, roads and sidewalks. South of that, which was within the city at the time, the city actually owns the right-of-way, including the sidewalks, and the state owns the road between the curbs. I think there are some exceptions along the way to this general rule, but this makes it, a bit complicated too. So that this all kind of happened in the 30s and 40s. Then kind of mid-century, there was another major investment in the street. There was a big repaving. The street ended up being 4 lanes, and it had parking on the outside. And so what this meant is really the, this is the picture I wanted to get to. So that middle part where the 4 lanes are now has that concrete base under it. And then where the parking lane is, they kind of filled it in with a softer aggregate base and paved over it, and then put the curbs in place. And this is where, this is when the current kind of physical configuration was developed, with about 60 feet between the curbs and about 70 feet in some places a little bit wider with the right of way, including the sidewalks. So you can see that outer part where the car is parked is, it looks a little different, and that there's a reason for that. So then this is the 1980s. This is, again, when Margi was talking about how the highways were added, I-205 was constructed, and 82nd's function really evolved quite a bit. And this is the point at which we have the design that really you see today, which is two lanes in each direction and a center turn lane. The parking was removed. You can still see here in this outer lane, kind of the shadow of that different base. And I keep coming back to that. There's this really nice concrete base in the middle that's very strong, still there today. And then the outer 8 feet is, you can tell that that's kind of, it's a little bit more rutted, it's cracking. And so these are the kinds of things that we were trying to examine as we were looking towards jurisdictional transfer. And that outer lane is still there today. So pavement is just one thing we looked at, pavement condition, but in addition to that, we were trying to assess all the different, what we call assets along 82nd, the infrastructure assets, signals, lighting, drainage, structures, sidewalks, and everything related to basic safety. And I think I've heard it described as this is kind of like our home inspection. If we're considering, transferring the ownership from ODOT to PBOT, this is our home inspection period. Most people wouldn't buy a house without an inspection, although I hear it's getting more and more frequent with the real estate market as it is. But we agreed an inspection was a good idea. So that's really what we've been trying to do. And this shows some ODOT crews who got out per the date, it was in August 2019. And they are actually assessing the physical pavement condition today. And you can see that we still have a lot of the rutting and cracking in that outer part of that outer lane. It doesn't have a great base. And they're taking a core sample here, drilling into the street. This is the second one of over 80 that they took along the length of the corridor. And then we all got a chance to take a look at what they found. And so this is the actual core that they pulled out of the street. You can see there's about 3 inches of asphalt there, and then it kind of crumbles. There's not much underneath it that's really holding the road up. And so that's why you get such kind of damaged pavement on that outer lane. This is different than, this is one of the cores that they pulled from closer to the middle of the road, where you can see a couple inches of the asphalt over a nice deep solid concrete core. And so that's really what we have in the middle of 82nd. And if you're out there, you can tell that really more of the damage is towards the outside of the street. And so this is the type of information that we use to come up with, what types of investments do we need to do to get 82nd up to a condition that's what we would call a state of good repair. And that gave us a sense of how to then estimate what is the cost of the overall investment on 82nd that's needed. So where are we now on the path? We have community support both for investment and for jurisdictional transfer on 82nd. We have a shared commitment. Both PBOT and ODOT agree that this makes sense to achieve a transfer. And now we have a good understanding of what is needed on 82nd. I'll note that the regional transportation funding measure, kind of gearing towards that, we were doing a lot of this work around jurisdictional transfer during that process, and it would have likely been a catalyst for jurisdictional transfer. As you all know, it did not pass, but I think this work and the work of the measure as well kind of prepared us for upcoming opportunities with funding and transfer. And I will say that the conversation on 82nd is ongoing, and there are opportunities in front of us right now. And so I won't go into that now, but as we transition to questions, discussion, be happy to talk about that or have Shelli, Glen, Margi and John chime in as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karla. And thank you. These were all really good examples. And I'd like, we've got questions in the chat. We're a little bit ahead of time, which is great because it seems to be that we're getting comments. We have questions. Before we open it up to the audience for questions, I did notice that there was a question about what is affectionately called the BUD, or ODOT's new, am I going to get the BUD right? Maybe Glen, you can help me.
Blueprint for urban design.
Right, blueprint for urban design. I've already gotten used to calling it the BUD. So for folks who don't know what that is, there was a comment in the chat about it. Can you explain what BUD is?
Sure thing. So this is really quite a revolution within ODOT. We've really changed our design process. I think a lot of people think of roadways, they think of like, what's the priority user? This is really much more starting with the concept of let's figure out how to integrate uses the best way we can. So it's a series of design guides based on like lane width, sidewalks, bikeways, the different facilities. And the really amazing part is it links to the land use context. So, you know, it's putting in to the manuals that, you know, downtown, you know, the center of Beaverton is different than Oregon 8 a mile down the road, Canyon, you know, TV highway. And so the designs should reflect that difference. So we have like, I think 5 different categories of land use. So this is how you get like a Sisters or a Silverton or something where the highway changes dramatically when it comes into a new city. And so the really interesting thing about the BUD is it starts on the multimodal side of the spectrum, and then you have to document why you move toward the more auto. So for example, you have to start with, I think the beginning is like an 11-foot lane, and if you want to get up to a 12, you need to document why. And the range, like for example, in an urban mix would be an 11 or 12-foot lane with the 2 options you've got. And so, whereas before, I think people might have said, okay, we only got some trucks here, let's start with 12 or 13, and then we would try to narrow it because we try to make room for a sidewalk. Now it's like starting with the narrower lane, starting with the wider sidewalk and the wider bike lane, and then narrowing as needed because we don't have a right of way, things like that, but document starting from that multimodal aspect. So it's quite a shift. It also, for the engineers out there, it lets us avoid doing a whole bunch of design exceptions, which is quite a laborious process. If we follow the guidance and we have the sign off on the guidance, staying within the ranges, then we can save a lot of work and streamline the projects.
Great. Thanks, Glen. So I'm gonna, I see people are adding in on the chat, which is great. Feel free also to use the raise hand function and turn off your screen and ask a question as well. I can't see all your faces, so I don't know if you're waiting in the wings to ask a question, but until I see a hand up, I'm going to just continue through some of the chat. So to follow up, Nathan asked a question regarding the BUD. Now I'll ask it to the whole panel. I think it's geared towards ODOT, but I think it's a relevant question. So given that ODOT has the BUD, do you still see the frequency or the need for jurisdictional transfer, given there is now design flexibility in the BUD? Panelists, why don't you feel free to weigh in? And I think Nathan's turning his screen on. Thank you, Nathan. Feel free to follow up if I didn't capture your question correctly.
I'll start since I'm off of mute. I think the BUD provides a lot of great new options. And you got to remember, we do our documents for the entire state, right? So there are a lot of, you know, there aren't many cities that have the kind of design standards that are so multimodal like Portland or, you know, Beaverton, you know, especially more, you know, all over the state. So the BUD is really a vehicle to help us do those kind of designs. You can see a great example if you look at downtown Tillamook. We recently used the BUD to develop a new main street through town there. And, you know, they're not of the financial capacity either to take over ownership. Whereas a larger jurisdiction would be. I think one of the big reasons that transfer is a popular.
I gave it to you anyway.
Pardon? One of the reasons that the transfer is a popular option is it usually comes with funding. You know, either in the case of Powell through legislative direction, or in other cases where, as I mentioned, an investment by into part of the upgrade by ODOT is a way for us buying down our future maintenance costs. So that trade-off or that benefit can help facilitate the construction, which is why the transfer might be a good way to go.
Karla,
I would
or
add-
oh, go ahead. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
I would
Shelli.
also add that it's okay that, the BUD really applies to a project, and every project has limits, right? So for example, ODOT has a project on 82nd Avenue right now that's in design between Foster and Thompson. So when we employ the BUD, it's for that section. It doesn't really speak to the rest of the sections of the corridor. And also these urban arterials and high crash corridors, we know that they don't serve their intended function that they once did. So we do feel that it is a good, compelling reason for us to continue to have conversations with our partners about jurisdictional transfer.
John or Karla, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think all I'll say is, I think the BUD is a great step that allows, for ODOT to manage those streets in a way that makes a lot of sense for the urban context. And I think it is it does offer a lot more flexibility and, potentially, I guess, as your question was getting at, does that mean we need to transfer? Maybe it could take away some of the urgency, but it's still, I think in the case of the streets that we're talking about, really they, just because of the change of the function to serving more of those urban uses, it just kind of makes more sense ultimately for those transfers to still occur.
I would agree the BUD is a great new tool, but there's still the place for transfer for many of these facilities.
Great. And so Nathan, do you have a new question, or were you going to expound on the question that you asked?
Well, just a kind of quick follow-up, and kind of curious
sure.
how pursuing kind of a designated highway, special highway designation, kind of like a special transportation area, kind of the benefits to continuing to pursue that, given the guidance that's within the BUD.
STAs is a tool to be, pursued, and there's all places all over the state where STAs are a tool, but I don't think it really fits. I don't know, Glenn, you can talk about the design, but STA doesn't necessarily relate to transfer. It could potentially inform design, correct, Glenn?
Yes, so special transportation areas, STAs, are an official ODOT designation, and they bring in different standards when we look at design. The CBD, traditional downtown context within the BUD, that guidance is very similar to what's in the highway design manual for the special transportation areas. So I think there is an attempt to replace the need to go for an STA. So, partly just so that everyone has a good understanding of what the standards are. That as Karla said, or as Margi said, that it doesn't really relate to ownership.
And then I've got one more question on this topic, and then we'll change topics. Colin asked a question. I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to stay on this BUD topic. If the BUD is applied sporadically by ODOT, or is it a standard process? Can cities influence if ODOT applies BUD for roads to pass through them, and how does that work?
I'll take that one then. The BUD is new, and right now it is what we call a bridging document. We will update the highway design manual. But this question, Colin, has been something we've been talking about. There is a difference between the current context and an aspirational context. What your plans are aiming to do. For those planners on the here, Beaverton just updated new design standards that triple their minimum density. They outlaw quick auto services, and even car sales from the downtown. So they are clearly trying to change the land use environment there, which would change the context. So what we have, we want to be able to recognize those things. So what we're doing right now is, as Shelli said, every project that we do, everything in the STIP, whether it's a signal pole or a lane redo, like Shelli did on Lombard, we now fill out the BUD concurrence form. We identify what is the context and what are the relevant planning considerations. We put together a map. We actually met with, just a couple weeks ago, in advance of this current STIP, we met with cities and counties from around the region to document areas where we think the BUD is related to those STIP projects, and areas where the cities and us think it might be changing in the future. So for example, if 82nd is a great example. It's a commercial corridor in most places. The city's comprehensive plan, though, has several, like 3 different unique centers that are supposed to be oriented along 82nd that's trying to develop. So in the map, this aspirational map, we've got commercial corridor for the existing BUD context, and then we have urban mix, which is the next step up in multimodalism for those sections where the comprehensive plan of the city of Portland is looking for more walkability, more of the 20-minute neighborhood kind of thing. So that's something that this is brand new, but that's something that we are working with our technical center on scoping the STIP projects. We do not have a statewide inventory of what the BUD contexts are. We did this for Region 1 to get ahead of the STIP, but I'm calling it a preliminary BUD, because to really set the BUD, I need to go in with a group of planners and look at codes, look at capital improvement plans, and really understand, if with the light rail, for example, on Hall Boulevard and Tiger, there's no question there was money on the table to change that context. So then we'd recognize that. So that kind is preliminary, so we can inform our STIPs people and share with our partners. But as we do actual projects, that gets documented, and that's then filed as for what the context is. And we do work with our partners on all of that.
Great. So thank you, Glenn. I'm going to switch topics here. So we've got 2 questions that are somewhat related about the engagement of business owners, and another question around engagement of freight. I think this particular question from Emma Newman, I'm going to hand it to Shelli, because it's kind of, I believe it's SB 4008, that's Powell. Curious to hear how that has been impacting planning process and projects along the corridors in these states, especially business property owner involvement requirements. So kind of a mix of planning and business owner engagement.
Emma, I'm not 1,000% sure, but I think that 408 was the one that triggered what we're going to call access management. So that legislation came about because businesses lobbied the legislature to basically implore ODOT to start developing a new way of working with business owners. So we have an access management process that is very rigorous, that involves a lot of discussions and negotiations with property owners and with sometimes their legal counsel to, and we have like one case right now that's going to like a dispute resolution board on Outer Powell specifically. And some of the impacts that can have obviously is you've got to build in time for the potential that there may be disputes, or there may be collaborative discussions with several stakeholders, including like the property owner, their legal counsel, the local jurisdiction is invited, and then ODOT folks as well as DOJ. And so, it can impact schedule, it can impact budget, it can impact all kinds of things. So it's certainly, and there was a lot of on Outer Powell in particular. If you think of a lot of these urban arterials also, there are undefined driveways, there are driveways too close to intersections. So we look at modifying or having there only be one driveway. And so it is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Shelli. And for those who don't follow the access management lingo, that really is kind of the driveways along, or the entrance and exits along highways are very complex in urban arterials, and add a lot of safety risks just in terms of pedestrian flow, bike flow, car flow. So it's another piece of the puzzle in urban arterials. So that was a great question. A related question, a somewhat related question, I'm skipping around, but going to, there was a question about have freight services weighed in, and what are their primary comments? I wonder if I could kick that over to maybe like Karla, or your work on 82nd. Have you had any, freight services weigh in or working on any of these projects, or maybe having examples this from past transfers?
Gosh, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this. I would say
Okay.
that, yeah, with 82nd actually is one of the, so it's one of the ODOT routes that is not a, what I believe is called a reduction review route. And what that means is basically it's a state law that you can't shrink the hole in the air, or narrow in the amount of space that freight has to pass through. 82nd is one of the highways that is not on that list. And so there's a lot more flexibility on 82nd. And so with 82nd, more the issue is access to all the surrounding land uses that are immediately around 82nd. I-205 provides more of that through movement. So
Yeah.
I'll kick it over if anyone else has other.
Yeah,
I can take it.
I was just going to say a clarification. It's not state statute. It's OAR. So it's
OAR.
state regulation. And it's listed, is updated in regulatory. But go ahead, Shelli. Yeah.
Well, two examples. So Outer Pal is we're going to call a 366125, which is the OAR. And that refers to, it's a designated freight route where you can't skinny up the width or the height in that given corridor. And any attempt to do that means that you, with every one of our projects, we have to go to the Mobility Advisory Committee, which is primarily or historically been freight stakeholders, but has recently added some other modes to that group. So Lombard is also a 366 route, and we had to go back 3 times in order to get our checklist signed, which is a requirement for delivering a project. And the reason was because we were putting in median islands and pedestrian flashing beacons, and those pedestrian islands would have impeded or shrank down the width of the travel lane. And it wasn't ideal, but we did get to a compromise, which was that ODOT agreed to design the median islands to be mountable. And so it is becoming more of a challenge to sort of balance all the needs of the corridor and all of the different users.
Great. Thank you, Shelli. So I would be remiss if I didn't take a question from Metro Councilor Rosenthal, my counselor. So Councilor Rosenthal asked, we, Metro, ODOT, and JPACT are in the process of revising the mobility policy. Will this affect the transfer modifications? I'm very involved in that project, but I know my colleague Glen is as well. So Glen, would you like to talk about that, and what really is the mobility policy update that ODOT and Metro are working on together?
I could eat up all of our time and then some.
I know, short, two sentences. What is it?
Yeah, the elevator speech here. This is a tough one, and we can get into it another time. Feel free to contact me. We right now we have a lot of policies for what our roadways do. We have one measurable standard, and that is volume to capacity. And so transportation has to serve land use in the state of Oregon. We're getting to places in some of our facilities where, as you can imagine, there are no good mitigations. So when we do new zoning, like I mentioned, the Beaverton's downtown, there's room to create the mitigations or the turn lanes or the extra widenings that would be feasible. And it's also, leads people to focus, even though there are other goals, having that numerical VC standard leads people to focus on vehicle capacity without thinking as much about all the other modes. So we're looking at a new policy for Region 1 that would be adopted by both Metro and ultimately the Oregon Transportation Commission. And it's early. Google it, look it up. We have a lot of information on the web. We've got a series of practitioner forums happening right now where I'm doing a lot of meetings. So it's a great time to get involved if you are in that world. It's about as short as I can get it.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. And stay tuned. There is a project again, this is a very important topic. We're really talking fundamentally about changing the way we measure transportation. If you go to Metro's website, it's called the Mobility Policy Update, and maybe we could put a link in the chat, and maybe we'll bring a panel back next year to talk about that important topic, but it is related. Armando Zalata, my friend Jerry, asked a question about HB 3065-5, led by Speaker Kotek, would have ODOT footing. So there's a proposal in the legislature that would have ODOT footing 25% of the cost to 82nd for it to transfer. And should this legislation pass this session, as it's likely to, I would take issue with that statement. I don't think right now that's on the table anymore, but I think it's a good question. Is this a proposal that the city of Portland is interested in? Why? I'm going to kick that over to Karla. And I believe this, and I'll just say, with knowing this legislation is continuing to change day by day and hour by hour right now, but go ahead, Karla.
Yeah, thanks. So the version that you're referencing with offering 25% of the cost and then transferring to PBOT is, I guess to put it bluntly, that would not be good for from the city's perspective. I think, as you noted in your comment, we do not have the resources to make the upgrades needed to achieve the state of good repair or even the safety needs. So I think, with fixing our streets as a funding source, we've been able to invest more in the past years, but even with that, our resources fall far short of what we need to both invest in safety and maintain our own city system without adding another asset that clearly has a lot of needs. And so I think from the city of Portland's perspective, we agree, we want to take 82nd, but it needs to come, I think, with an infusion of funding. And that's something that there are, a number of sources that can be considered.
And great, thank you, Karla. And with 1 minute left, I'm going to give John, you haven't had a chance to say as many words. And I was wondering on this topic, if you could speak to how we tackled both kind of cost and investment in the Metro's jurisdictional transfer study in terms of kind of cost methodology.
Yeah, we had our consulting team, WSP, develop a methodology to give folks a starting point for developing the costs needed to complete a transfer. So we have that available to our partners to look at and to use for future transfer discussions. And we think will be a useful tool going forward to help people give kind of a even playing field for how to do this kind of cost estimation.
Right. Yes, Jerry, do you have a follow-up question? We're exactly at 12:30. Yes.
I think my question as an advocate is still, how do we raise the hierarchy of safety in both of these considerations, whether it's the hole in the air or whether it's the transfer of jurisdiction? Safety gets at the bottom of the slide, or maybe not even on the slide. As you remember, we had an issue with the 366 rule in Terrebonne. We wanted to put in a pedestrian activated crosswalk so kids could go to school on the other side of Highway 97. The freight really slowed that progress down and really brought the hole in the air issue to be much more transparent, thankfully. And we got that. We got the safety issue occurring on something that slowed the hole in the air concept. And here we've got transfer of many streets that have so many safety issues. As we appreciate Karla's bringing up the Alberta 82nd Street fatalities so close together. And it's hard to see ODOT, just transfer their troubles away.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And I'll just take this one in terms of trying to kind of wrap us up here. I think, that's where really having a strategic vision, when we first came on, I know ODOT's working on their strategic vision to have safety in the forefront. And obviously City of Portland is a Vision Zero city. And I think after that, those commitments are done, the question is, how do you realign your investments? Because all of this safety work is needed, as you said, and all of it does take investments, and there's not enough money to go around. So we continually have to work through how to prioritize safety to save lives. So great comment, great question. So with that, oh, Glenn, were you gonna?
Real quick.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we wanted to do this was to highlight the opportunities, because we do see that there is a direct linkage between our equity focus areas that Metro's mapped and our crashes and our injuries. And ODOT just published a report on social justice, social equity, and accidents of pedestrians statewide. So hopefully this project inspires people to look into some of these transfers so that we can then get that funding to, that's one of the, there's a bill right now in discussion to like put aside money for these arterial conversions. So we are hoping to get at those things with this work. I appreciate your comment.
Yeah. Yes. Great topic to end on. And thank you everyone for your time. I think we go to 12:30, correct? I've got that correct. Okay, great. Thank you everyone. Thanks for your time, and have a good lunch if you haven't already. Thanks.
Thanks, panelists and moderator. Good job, everybody.
Thank you.